Welcome back. We are now moving into section three being culture. Um, this is really what the field of sociology is all about. Culture, boiled down to its essence, means simply learned behavior. What us humans figure out as we're maneuvering around in the material world. Culture includes things like the way we speak, the food we eat, the way we dress. Um, it's also important to note that culture is not biological. Rather, it's passed down from generation to the next through communication. We learn culture from our families, um, our religions, our schools, the media, and our peers. Those are the five groups that are primarily responsible for transmitting culture. It used to be thought that it was just the family, religion, and schools, but with the rise of media influences, social media, television for as long as television has now been with us, and the radio, and we're bombarded by culture being transmitted to us through the media itself. As society becomes more diverse, we have to consider that there are more institutions at work in transmitting culture. The concept of culture, of course, as I was mentioning earlier, has evolved and expanded throughout history. What we now know to be culture and the amount of culture, the diversity within cultures, is becoming more diverse, but in some respects, it's becoming more similar too. What I mean by that is it's becoming more diverse. We have more people on the planet. We have more cultural creations, if you will, but it's becoming more homogenized as well, because most of us get much of our media or much of our culture from the media itself. The media has a really, really important job in funneling what they're going to allow you to engage with. And if you're listening to or watching the primary networks, you're only getting so much of what's out there. They're choosing what you want, what they want you to see. So in that respect, it's becoming more homogenized. The oldest understandings of culture focus on the distinction between the natural environment and what is modified or created by humans. As I said, learned behavior, technology, all that stuff is part of that modified or created by humans perspective. And culture is an interesting thing. It shouldn't be viewed as bad or good, even though that's how we construct it sometimes. It should be seen more as what is socially acceptable and what is not socially acceptable. And we have to recognize that can change over time. So, as Europeans came into contact with non-Westerners, culture evolved in terms of differences between people, which could be viewed positively or negatively, as I foreshadowed in the previous slide. And in the 18th and 19th centuries, a new dimension was added to the mix to really work on this concept of culture. The idea that culture involved the pursuit of intellectual refinement. Sociologists really need to take caution to not be judgmental when evaluating other cultures. Our job is not to determine which culture is best, but rather it's to understand how and why culture may be similar or different. This is extremely important for us to understand because many of the intellectual and scientific brethren and sisters that have come before us have brought their own biases to play when they were evaluating other cultures. Anthropologists over the last, or historical anthropologists, or historically anthropologists have done a great disservice to many cultures they've come in contact with because they initially felt that they were less than or inferior to the culture that they represented. So we really need to be careful when we're evaluating other cultures, especially cultures that are not as technologically refined as we are. Talk a little bit more about the material and non-material culture. Material culture is everything that is part of the constructed environment, such as books, fashion, and monuments, things like that. You're looking at the Lincoln Memorial there. Non-material culture encompasses values, beliefs, norms, behaviors. This is more our thoughts, what we think about transgender people, what we think about gay marriage, thou shalt not kill, things like that. Items in culture do not have meaning inherently. This is something we really need to wrap our minds around. They only have meaning when we assign meaning to them. For example, in American culture, we know that a chair is for sitting in, but it could also be used as a stepladder or a weapon or a decoration. In this case, we have assigned meaning to it, and that makes it valuable in a certain way in our culture. The chair has a certain purpose. We don't necessarily think that it's going to be used as a weapon. It's more likely going to be used for someone to sit in it. Non-material culture works in a similar way. As a society, we determine the values, beliefs, behaviors, and social norms that we find appropriate and acceptable. Culture includes language, the meanings we assign to words and concepts such as class and equality and ownership are extremely important. Non-material culture can take the form of ideology, which is a system of concepts and relationships that includes an understanding of cause and effect. We really need to understand that this non-material culture certainly changes over time. Maybe not as fast as we think it should at times, thinking of ideas like social inequality, homophobia, things like that. You might feel to yourself that things should move faster. This is not the way the world should look at things. But it might not change as fast as you want it to. But at the same time, at this particular time in the world, because of all the social media we have, culture is changing a lot, and it's changing very quickly, almost to the point where it's becoming uncomfortable for some of the institutions that are responsible for the social reproduction of our reality on a daily, yearly, decadal time frame. Cultural relativism is another important concept that we really need to think about as we deal with culture in this course. This was coined by Ruth Benedict in the 1930s, and it's the idea that we should recognize differences across cultures without passing judgment on or assigning values to those differences. So in the previous slides, we were talking about this concept. Now we're giving it a name, and the name is cultural relativism. As previously mentioned, we take great caution to not judge other cultures as being inferior or superior. This is one of the biggest benefits of utilizing the sociological imagination. We have the ability to step back from our own lives and examine situations without bias. And that's not just a powerful concept for doing research on the social world, it's also a powerful concept in your own personal world. The ability to step back from something and to examine it from an unbiased perspective, or at least as unbiased as you can muster at that particular time. To be objective, to remove emotion, if only for a short period of time, from our understanding, from our equation here, that then gives us the opportunity to assess what we're seeing without the emotions involved in how we're constructing what we're seeing. Cultural scripts are also another important concept. These are modes of behavior and understanding that are not universal or natural, but that may strongly shape beliefs or concepts held by society. Gender roles are a good example. We'll talk more about those in Chapter 8. And I also teach a full-on course on gender, the sociology of gender, at Front Range Community College as well. Things like acting masculine or feminine may seem natural, but they're really not. These roles are strongly influenced by culture and society, and these behaviors are not universal. Roles may be very different from men and women in our cultures and our societies, but that is a social construction. We'll talk more about social constructions over the course of this semester, but that's learned behavior. Gender, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man. There are biological differences between the two individuals. One has a penis, one has a vagina, but the roles associated with what it means to be male and female are created within structures of power. And we're seeing right now those structures of power being turned over quite a bit with the implications of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape that are working their way through many of the institutions, male-dominated institutions, that have ignored them over time. This is an important moment in the formation of gender in the United States, and there will be impacts for a long time as a result of what's going on right now. Harvey Weinstein thought he was changing society through his influence in the media, but ultimately it's going to be his actions as a sexual assaulter and rapist that are going to change us probably the most, and for the best. We have things like subcultures. A subculture is a group united by a set of concepts, values, traits, and or behaviors that distinguish it from others within the culture or society. Usually at the expense or compared to the dominant. Sometimes members of subcultures are marginalized from society, but oftentimes these individuals interact with other members of society without notice. They just have characteristics that make them different from members of the larger dominant culture. Some examples could be people that listen to punk music, or people with navel piercings, or vegetarians, people with tattoos. Generally, these individuals still work, go to school, go grocery shopping, and interact normally with individuals in the dominant culture without incident. But these things can also be detractors. Having a tattoo was not seen as a good thing when I was younger. Now it's more socially acceptable. So culture changes over time. That is an important concept to remember. What culture are you talking about, and when in time are you talking about that culture?